Hey, what's up guys, and welcome to another RLCraft video. It has been a while, but RLCraft 2.9.2 has released recently, and this patch has pulled me back into this magnificent mod pack. There are so many changes, you can argue this is RLCraft 3.0. New structures, fixed mechanics, new mechanics, a ton of new enemies, new armor and set bonuses, new baubles with insane effects, rebalancing of combat that feels nice, except for you probably don't want to go here, and so much more. Without further ado, let's jump right into the major things that are new in RLCraft 2.9.2 and how you can utilize them. First up, baubles. There are a ton of amazing new baubles in RLCraft 2.9.2. The Ice Dragon's Eye, which grants the player full ice resistance, night vision, and immunity to cold. The Shock Pendant, the Flame Pendant, the Thorn Pendant, and Pendant of Ultimate Retribution, which all give the player useful damaging effects during combat. The Panic Necklace, which increases the player's speed when taking damage. The Whoopee Cushion, which makes the player fart when equipping it. The Cloud in a Bauble and Fart in a Jar, which both allow the player a useful double jump effect like a Jedi, and the Fart in a Jar also plays a fart sound effect every time you double jump. A Magma Stone, which causes all your melee attacks to set enemies on fire. The Feral Claws, which increase the player's melee attack speed, more on this effect in a bit. The Power Glove, which increases the user's melee attack damage. The Mechanical Glove, which is a combination of the Feral Claws and the Power Glove bubble. The Fire Gauntlet, which is a combination of the Feral Claws Fire Gauntlet and the Power Glove bubble. The Drinking Hat, which allows you to drink items at an increased speed. The Star Cloak, which makes small projectiles rain down around the player that damages enemies when the player is injured. The Pocket Piston, which increases your knockbacking capabilities when equipped. The Antidote Vessel, which reduces the strength of most debuffs when worn. Bubble Wrap, which makes the player immune to collision damage. The Lucky Clover, which makes you luckier for better loot luck. And lastly, the Sacrificial Amulet that grants the player a secret loot chest after defeating 100 enemies with the amulet worn. More on this later. Now that is a lot of new baubles. These baubles, besides the Ice Dragon's Eye, which has to be crafted, can all be obtained from mimics that now spawn in the world. Like in Terraria, mimics disguise themselves as chests, and mimics can be found very rarely as any chest in an area without pre-generated loot, or chests that load loot merely as a player loads the chunk. Villages and roguelike dungeons, for example, have pre-generated loot, or chests that generate right when the structure itself is generated. Here, mimics cannot be found, but Lycanite dungeons, Dragon Nests, Vanilla dungeons, and the Lost Cities have loot that generates right as you click on the chest, so mimics can be found there due to how mimics are coded to spawn in the world. I have found Dragon Nests, Dragon Dens, and Lycanite dungeons to be the best way to find the mimics, as there often are a lot of chests in these areas. In short, any area where luck is applied on your loot, mimics can be found there. Still though, mimics are very rare. My guess is there's only a 1 to 5% chance for you to find a mimic at any chest where they can spawn. But you will want to be on the lookout for mimics during your playthrough, as the Feral Claws bubble is absurdly useful. The attack speed this bubble gives you is very powerful, allowing your nunchucks to attack incredibly rapidly, so fast that I once again consider a max nunchuck weapon to be the best melee weapon in the game. If you combine this bubble with the Power Glove, you will make the Mechanical Glove, which is even better, as it increases your melee damage by a significant amount, as well as grants you the attack speed effect of the Feral Claws. You can also combine this with a Magma Stone for additional fire aspect effect on your melee attacks, but it isn't as game changing compared to the other two effects. In short, the Feral Claws is, in my opinion, the best new bubble added simply because it turns nunchucks with swifter slashes, combo, and fiery edge into a weapon of mass destruction. It also helps that there is a brand new fire and ice variant of the nunchucks now, which has a fairly high base attack stat. Two other bubbles that are practically new are the Broken Heart bubble and the Lucky Horseshoe. The Lucky Horseshoe is now enabled, and it requires 32 in agility to equip. The bubble makes the player immune to fall damage, and I have found the bubble in Lycanite dungeons and certain Doom-like dungeons. But the main highlight of this section is the absurdly powerful item that is the Broken Heart bubble. This bubble can be found primarily in Lycanite dungeons, but it can also be found in certain Doom-like dungeons. This bauble used to be pretty bad, but in 2.9.2 RLCraft, it finally does what it says it does. If you take lethal damage, your full heart containers will be broken instead. Basically, what this means is that all your hearts matter with this bauble equipped, just like in vanilla Minecraft. Your character literally will not die until all your hearts are gone. When your excess hearts are shattered because you quote-unquote defied death, you will not get them back until you sleep though, so keep them in mind. If you pair this bauble with the Undershirt ability in your L menu, which also has been fixed for RLCraft 2.9.2 and does what it says it does, You will feel confident and in control during all combat. This updated Undershirt ability literally makes you survive lethal damage once every 60 seconds. No matter how hard you are hit, you will survive a single instance of damage. With healing capabilities in both a Broken Heart Bauble and the Undershirt ability, you will practically never have to worry about dying ever again, except for if you fall into the void or certain Lost Cities enemies. With flight capabilities and a set of silver armor on top of this though, even the Lost Cities is very doable. Silver armor, if you didn't know, will make you immune to most status effects. Most notably, you will be immune to the Call of the Hive and fear effects Lost Cities enemies will inflict upon you. The Call of the Hive effect makes enemies spawn around you to a severe degree, so much so that it will be hard to even loot the drops off the ground because enemies will keep spawning around you. The fear effect that the Lost Cities enemies put on you will make it difficult for you to use your right-click actions, which can get you killed. And lastly, Lost Cities enemies will stack vulnerability effects on you, making your armor literally useless. So even if you are in maxed out golem armor with a few stacks of this debuff, you are practically naked. Silver armor is the only set of armor you should be wearing in the Lost Cities dimension for ultimate safety. Flight capabilities are the only thing you need now for the ultimate protection. Lycanite mobs, blight enemies, and especially the Lost Cities enemies do a lot of damage to your armor, so flying above them to avoid their attacks can be a lifesaver to avoid your armor breaking. Making potions of flight is simple, as all you need is bone spores and pixie dust, which drop from pixies in a flower forest biome. You can buy a map to flower forest biomes from cartographers. As long as a flower forest is within a certain distance from the cartographer, it is a whopping 30% chance to find a flower forest map from the cartographer. You can watch this video if you want to know how I got this percentage. Potions of dragon transformation are also fairly easy to make once you reach the endgame. Dragon's breath and glowing potions are all you need. These dragon transformation potions are actually incredible. You get 3 potions that last 3 minutes each from one output, and these potions give you 25% max health, 25% melee damage, 50% armor toughness, and flight. 3 3-minute potions for the measly cost of 1 redstone, 1 sugar, 9 diamonds, 6 glowing ingots, and 1 dragon's breath. Blight potions are easier to make, sure, but dragon transformation potions are pretty insane, and you don't have to go on a wild goose chase to make them. Anyways, back to what's new in RLCraft 2.9.2. The last new honorable mention new bauble is the Backpack Bauble. And yes, I saved the best for last in terms of surprise bauble because this is truly game changing. Unlike most baubles, this bauble is relevant for every player at the start of their playthrough. Backpacks used to need to be worn in your chest armor slot, but now they are worn in your bauble shirt armor slot. You crouch and right click the ground to place the bauble, and crouch and break the bauble to put the backpack back on. This backpack adds an incredible amount of extra inventory space that will make every player's early game exploration and material quests much smoother. The only downside is you can't wear a quiver bauble and a backpack bauble at the same time since they both fit in the shirt slot, but I never found quivers to be too game changing besides an easy undying quality reforge the backpacks can get as well, and storage for arrows. And besides, you can always store your quiver full of arrows inside your backpack. I will talk about dipped weapons next. This system is updated, works 100% and is smooth in RLCraft 2.9.2. To utilize this system, all you need to do is right-click potions in a cauldron, and then right-click the cauldron with your weapon. The most fun use of dipped weapons, in my opinion, is dipping a weapon of Potion of Random Teleport 2, and using it on Tower and Mega Battle Tower golems. When striking the golem, it teleports the golem, or any enemy mind you, away within 100 blocks or so, and this is very strong, fun, and even a bit troll. Dipped weapons from my testing never lose their potion effect until you use up the usages. If your throwaway iron sword has 8 hits of random teleport 2, the sword won't lose the effect until it hits enemies 8 times. This dipped weapon can also be nice against blight enemies that you aren't prepared to fight or running away during PvP on a multiplayer server, etc. It's a bit like the Gorgon Head 2.0, one inventory slot used for a get out of jail free card against non-boss enemies. You need 1 bone mushroom spores, 1 ender pearl, and 1 glowstone to make a batch of 3 random teleport 2 potions, which when applied to your weapon lets you teleport enemies away 24 times before running out of usages. That is fairly strong. Sadly, getting bone mushroom spores can be a bit dangerous, but if you get lucky and there are some right inside of your nether portal, you can grab some without much issue. Other potions can be useful to apply on your weapon against bosses like Rahovart, Amalglich, and Asmodeus, such as magical inhibition against Rahovart, so he does 60% less magic damage to you with his green flames, vulnerability against Amalglich, so he takes takes double damage for a short time, or Potion of Clutch, so Asmodeus does 8 less projectile damage to you. But keep in mind, most potion effects on your weapon apply effects only for a max of 11 seconds, so using a splash potion would be more useful, but those are hard to land. These potion effects either way are good, but never needed. The best use, I would say, is the dipped potion of random teleport 2. What you could do with dipped weapons though, is dip your weapon with a fairy transformation potion on it and use it on someone in PvP to turn them into a pathetically weak fairy for 22 seconds, and then just one-shot them while they are comically frozen as they are transforming into a fairy. I am unsure if it works, I don't have a means to test things on a multiplayer server, but the game files give me no reason to think it wouldn't work. Yet another hilarious reason why you should be afraid of RLCraft PvP. Whether it works or not, people can get very creative with dipped weapons. Next up, remember the Sacrificial Amulet, that new bauble I mentioned earlier in the video? I will now talk about that singular item. When you defeat 100 enemies with the amulet equipped, the amulet disappears and a loot chest is dropped at your feet. This chest pulls from a large pool of drops. The first set of armor you can get is the Scarlet Armor. This set gives the player a rage buff and a vulnerability offensive debuff effect when fully equipped. This armor set is the most offensive set in the game, which increases your overall DPS over time by around 20% against most enemies and up to 30% or so against heavily armored enemies. Keep in mind I did this testing with a maxed out nunchuck weapon. A 30% DPS increase is nothing to scoff at either way, but the armor isn't even as protective as Deathworm armor despite its high durability. The new X407 armor set can also be obtained from the Sacrificial Amulet, and this alien looking armor set gives the player strength 2 when worn, which is okay, but I would say the armor looks cooler than how strong it is, which is identical to diamond armor in defense. The armor set that is actually insanely fun that this bauble drops is the ninja set. If you get 3 out of 3 in this set, there are no boots by the way, you will be granted an incredibly fun dodge that launches the player incredibly far. Your normal dodge that only pushes you a few blocks that you get with Elenite dodge will now send you soaring with this armor set equipped. This set also looks pretty good. The next set of armor you can get from the Sacrificial Amulet is the Wizard set. This set gives you an extra point of mana regen every second for every piece of armor you wear, up to a max of 3, and again there are no boots in this set. If you equip 3 out of 3 of the armor, you'll be granted a random teleport effect that procs every 30 seconds. This teleport effect is rather inconvenient, so I recommend only wearing 2 of the armor for the regen effect, which can be convenient for certain things such as when transformed with the Ring of the Dragons and you want to fly around. I still find mana crystals and mana candy more convenient for mana regen though, and this armor is very hard to acquire. Next up, the amulet also drops cow leather armor that lets you moo like a cow.
Moo?
Alright, so all this armor is pretty cool, but all this armor can only be obtained from the Sacrificial Amulet loot boxes, which come from the Sacrificial Amulet, which only can be obtained as a rare drop from the already rare enemy, the Mimic. Yeah. These armors are going to be very hard to acquire. Fortunately, none of this armor is better than silver armor in terms of utility, which again grants the player 50% movement speed and immunity to just about every negative effect in RLCraft. And none of this armor comes even close to golem armor, let alone dragon armor in terms of defense. So I would consider this armor just a few extra things you can keep track of in the game, but not something you ever need to actively seek out. These Sacrificial Amulets also drop other things besides these armor sets. You can actually get a gun from the chest. Hold right click to load the gun until you hear a click, and then hold right click and then release to fire. The gun is very weak. You can also get a wooden staff from the Sac Amulet, so you can be a wizard, which is arguably worse than the gun. And no, this magic staff does not count as magic damage, so you can't increase it with golden bookworm armor, which is very bad. Lastly, you can get holy hand grenades, nether stars, and XP bottles from these Sacrificial Amulets. Because of all these loot drops, getting these new armor is very hard. If you do somehow get one of these sets though on like a multiplayer server, that certainly is something to show off. Next up, another new set of armor, this time not obtained from the Sacrificial Amulet, is the Steel Armor. Steel ingots now have another nice use, and steel armor is fairly strong. While offering less defense compared to diamond armor, steel armor has a set effect that grants the player 50% fire resistance and immunity to all burning. When paired alongside an obsidian skull bauble, the player now has about 75% fire resistance, making dragons much easier to take on with no fire resistance potions, dragon's eye, or enchanted golden apple needed. Lastly, for new armor, I will mention the living armor and sentient armor. These armor sets, however, can only be crafted with materials from defeating enemies in Lost Cities Dimensions, so they're pretty hard to acquire. The living armor Armor set is very weak even when utilizing its adaptation characteristics, so I will just talk about the upgraded version, the Sentient Armor. The Sentient Armor adapts to damage sources, and each piece of Sentient Armor can adapt up to 3 different sources of damage, giving you a max of 20% damage reduction of that particular damage source. If all 4 pieces of your Sentient Armor are fully adapted to that damage source, you will have an 80% damage reduction effect on your armor of that damage source. For example, if I make my armor adapt correctly, I can choose to have an 80% damage reduction to all collision damage, enderman damage, and drowning damage, just being a few examples. For your armor to adapt to a damage source, you need to be wearing the armor while taking the damage you want to gain resistance towards, and the armor will do the rest. The armor set will only adapt to the first 3 damage sources your player takes while wearing the armor, and the damage reduction doesn't seem to have a way to be changed, so do be careful not to get hit by something accidentally before your armor has all the desired damage reduction effects. Sadly, since the armor can only adapt to individual types of enemies, it isn't a very good defensive armor overall, but I have found that on multiplayer servers at least, you should be able to make your character obtain an 80% PvP damage reduction from player damage wearing this set. You'll only need to find a friend to slap you a few times to gain the damage reduction effect. This effect can be particularly useful in multiplayer, but not in single player. In single player, making the armor adapt to collision damage seems to be the only consistent useful adaptation for a general player, but the bubble wrap or stone of inertia null baubles make you immune to that damage source anyways. The armor would be very useful if it could make your character take 80% damage reduction from specific enemy types such as all Lost Cities enemies or all undead enemies, etc., but sadly it doesn't do that. I have also found that it is nearly impossible to make specific Lost Cities enemies do damage to you without your armor breaking because of how much damage they do to you, and you're just going to get swarmed by enemies anyways because unlike silver armor you will be affected by the Call of the Hive effect, so making the armor useful against Lost Cities enemies unfortunately is way more trouble than it's worth from my testing. I have found from my testing though that Sentient Boots with the collision 20% damage reduction on its own, alongside a full set of ninja armor, since you slam it to walls so often using the ninja dodge effect, is actually a pretty good use of Sentient Armor. But getting a full set of ninja armor in survival is way too RNG to be something I would ever recommend going for, but in theory it would be nice and they look nice together. Overall, Sentient Armor looks cool, but I myself haven't found a good enough reason to use the armor over silver armor. Next up, still on the topic of equipment, I will talk about some new armor set effect bonuses and new weapons that are added in RLCraft 2.9.2. Starting off, Golem, Marmix, and Deathworn Armor now have armor set bonuses. Deathworn Armor gives 50% dig speed, Marmix Armor gives step height +1, and Golem Armor gives repulsion and diamond skin, which is actually pretty insane. Repulsion makes Darklings unable to grab onto you, and all enemies that attack you will now bounce off you, and they bounce off pretty far, being very good when paired with Advanced Thorns. On top of that, Diamond Skin gives you a decent damage reduction from all sources. Golem Armor's chest value has also been fixed to be the strongest in the game. Golem Armor is by far the strongest defensive armor in the game in RLCraft 2.9.2, with its only downside being you sink in water while wearing the armor, which makes underwater combat awkward. If you make a Stone of the Sea bauble, which is much easier than it used to be in 2.9 RLCraft, the Golem Armor doesn't even struggle in water. You can now find Neptunian nuggets in ocean dungeons, which you can combine to make Neptunian ingots, and you can smelt all Neptunian armor into Neptunian ingots as well, so fishing for the ingot is much more doable than before. Now, for new craftable equipment, I have to talk about the new sentient weapons that can only be obtained through crafting with materials from monsters in the Lost Cities dimension. The Sentient Great Scythe has a powerful arc/hidden enchantment. The Sentient Great Axe lowers the opponent's armor, like an invisible rune-piercing capabilities enchantment. Fun fact, the rune-piercing capabilities enchantment now works as intended in RLCraft 2.9.2, making it stronger than it was before. The Sentient Greatsword gives a solid damage over time bleeding effect whenever you crit, but this effect doesn't work on bosses by the looks. The Sentient Great Cleaver, which from my testing seems to be the very best melee weapon in the game, makes you do astronomical damage against enemies that you attack multiple times in sequence. In short, if the enemy has a lot of HP, this weapon will make short work of them, and against low HP enemies you will 1 or 2 shot them anyways, making the Sentient Great Cleaver in my opinion the best melee weapon in the game. But the nunchucks are easier to use and easier to obtain. And lastly, the Sentient Bow does a lot more damage than even a strength than Dragonbone Bow. It is by far the highest damage bow in the game, and out of these weapons I would say it is what you should be going for if you want any of these sentient weapons. All these weapons are very good, as they don't need enchantments on their own to destroy most enemies, but the enchantments they have on them as a base are merely variations of enchantments that already exist in the game. So while they all do add crazy amazing effects, I find that a maxed out melee weapon perform only slightly less than these weapons when you also max them out with enchantments, and I have found that a maxed out nunchucks weapon does considerably more DPS than all of these sentient melee weapons. These weapons do hit much harder for a single instance of damage, which is just about all you need though. So technically these weapons perform just about as good as nunchucks. These sentient weapons look phenomenal and have increased range though, and the only reason I don't recommend them more fervently is that nunchucks are much easier to acquire. But if you can manage to get them, these weapons are amazing. Next up, new structures. This section deserves its own video. There are not only dozens of new structures with amazing loot, but the loot pools of existing structures have been heavily modified. I highly recommend you playing a playthrough and seeing this for yourselves. You will come across new and interesting structures in every dimension, and just about every one of them is worth looting. This nether structure in particular has an absurdly amazing loot pool. So much silver, blaze powder, enchantment books, steel, diamonds, and much more. The new end structures are also pretty absurd, and they are incredibly common, making shulker box hunting super quick. On the topic of shulker boxes though, underground in the overworld, I have found explosive crates recently that have dropped shulker shells when destroyed. I'm not sure if that was in 2.9.1 RLCraft, either way it's pretty neat. This overworld structure has insane loot as well. The difficulty of the structure is a bit under a 4-tower dungeon, so it isn't incredibly difficult to clear early on. Now I could go on and on, but you get the picture. There are a lot of new amazing things to see in RLCraft 2.9.2. Moving on to the last section of the video before ending, I will rapid fire some more notable RLCraft 2.9.2 changes that don't require all that much of an explanation, unlike previous sections. Battle axes now take axe enchantments as well as weapon enchantments, so it can double as a weapon and wood cutting device. Because of that, in the endgame you don't need an axe anymore. Instead, you will have a battle axe. This is what a maxed out battle axe looks like. There is now a potion sickness effect, which gives your player various random negative effects when you have 12 or more potion effects on at a time. These negative effects, such as scattering the inventory and nausea, are irremovable as long as you have 12 or more potion effects on. This does nerf the max potions and wine setup a bit, but honestly you never really needed 12 potion effects at a time to be OP. Wine has also been nerfed a bit, but the potential of the system is just as amazing as before. You just need a higher quality wine to get the same results as before, and you need to have a forbidden fruit bauble, Ankh charm, or Ankh shield equipped to be immune to the nausea effect that inebriation will grant the player, as silver armor no longer protects you from nausea. Forbidden fruit baubles are fairly common in mega battle towers, doom-like dungeons, and other structures, and they can also be dropped from husk zombies in the desert, so it's not that big of a deal. The Ankh shield is also amazing to have in your offhand anyways, as it can be reforged for undying quality, which does take effect on your character even when used as a normal shield, and has good shield durability, so it can be used as a natural blocking utility, which is incredible for your player's own defense. I recommend an Ankh shield to be something for just about every player to be going for. Onto a few more things. New maps can be found at cartographers. One notable map being a map to a defiled lands, which can help you on your quest for a Scarlight Dagger in the early to mid game, and the Scarlight Dagger is just a great weapon that gives you a leech effect when you hit enemies, so it will help you with survival. There are some really pretty building blocks that were added in 2.9.2 RLCraft as well. I haven't done enough research to know where to locate most of these blocks or even what all the new blocks are, but many of them do look quite nice, so builders rejoice. Amphitheaters hurt twice as much now, making it more dangerous to tame them, which kinda sucks, but it's not all that big of a deal. The moment you were to get off these beasts, they run away anyways. Even when you manage to breed the amphitheaters and give the babies instructions to sit, they just seem to run away anyways. I have never found amphitheaters that OP, besides when expanding your atlas. And lastly, the most important change in all of RLCraft 2.9.2, finally after years, your character's smart enough to eat a carrot without needing 4 in farming. With that, I am going to wrap up. I apologize for my non-existent upload schedule as of late. RLCraft 2.9.1 wasn't my favorite patch, as becoming invincible was impossible and the loot pools felt a little dry, which unfortunately disinterested me. 2.9.2 RLCraft, however, fixes these concerns and does so much more. I hope you find RLCraft 2.9.2 as refreshing as I have already, and I'm sure I missed a few important new things added since this version has only been out for a week. Leave a comment if there's something like really important I missed, and I'll either pin the comment or leave a comment on my my own mentioning it. Either way, for RLCraft 2.9.2, I mentioned just about every new thing that I've personally found in this video, and I hope you enjoyed. Have a wonderful day, gamers. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.